So I don't know if, as you've been wandering around in your life, you ever see unusual signs like this one. Touching wires causes instant death. $200 fine. You kind of wonder, which are you more concerned about? Or this one, please be safe. Do not stand, sit, climb, or lean on zoo fences. If you fall, animals could eat you, and that might make them sick. So, although these signs are a little unusual, today I want to talk about a premise that to some may also seem unusual. The question, why would authors and publishers give away books? And today I want to share the results of 3 separate studies that have focused on this question from slightly different angles. One is a study of 10 authors who have given away books. Second is some empirical evidence that we've done that looks at actual numbers of how free affects print sales. And third, we'll be looking a little bit at Flat World Knowledge and their model of free book distribution. One study that we did was, and when I say we, I'm referring to David Wiley, who's my PhD advisor and myself. One study we did was we interviewed 10 authors who have made their works freely available for others to access. And our 2 main questions to them were, number 1, what motivated you to do so? And number 2, what impact do you think free had on your work? And I'll just share some of the responses to these 2 questions. Basically, the 2 desires, the 2 reasons, motivations that emerged were, number 1, desire to increase the exposure of the book, and number 2, a feeling that open publishing is, morally speaking, the correct thing to do. Many of you are probably familiar with this statement from Tim O'Reilly, who said, obscurity is a far greater threat to authors and creative artists than piracy. And that was definitely the feeling amongst the 10 authors that we talked to. There was never a fear of losing royalties or having their work pirated, but rather just that no one would ever even find out or be able to access their information. Quick story. Many of you, I hope, have read Lawrence Lessig's book, Free Culture. So on March 25th, 2004, a PDF version of the book was made available online for anyone to download for free. And because it had a buy-in CSA license, people were also free to modify it. The very next day, the Reverend A.K.M. Adam made a blog post saying, hey, let's make an audio version of this book. And within 2 more days of that, most of the book was available to be downloaded as an audio file. And it's amazing to think that in 72 hours, the book went from PDF to MP3 with no effort at all on the part of Mr. Lessig. Now, the book itself has sold about 17,000 copies since it was published. However, consider the additional impact because the book was made open. It's been downloaded several 100,000 times, translated into 7 different languages, and been put into 16 different ebook formats. All of these addressing this first concern of the authors that we want to increase the ability of people to access our work. I love this quote from Cory Doctorow, who said, the number of people who wrote to tell me about how much they dug the ebook and so bought a paper book far exceeds the number of people who wrote me and said, haha, you hippie, I read your book for free and now I'm not going to buy it. Some authors pointed out that they believe sales would increase because the book was available for free. And this paradox is evident because so many more people will then access and hear about the free version of the book, and many of them would have never bought the book anyway. But some who would have never heard of the book will then access the free copy and now have a desire to read it. As was stated by James Boyle, why might free digital availability make sense for parts of the publishing industry? First, most people hate reading a book on a screen but like finding out if it's worth buying. I'm sure I have lost some sales, but my guess is that I have gained more new readers who otherwise would be unaware of my work, who treat the digital version as a sampler to which they then introduce to others. One last on this, a gentleman named Kimbrough McLeod had a book, Freedom of Expression, that he made freely available. And the book itself has been downloaded 50,000 times, many, many more times than actual print copies sold. He said, I think openness has extended the long tail of my book. It may not have sold a large amount when it was first released, but it continues to sell well. I think part of that is the visibility that open licensing created and the goodwill it's created. Now I want to come back to the second motivation, which was a moral obligation to make the work available. And this was talked about earlier, and I noticed this, some of you probably saw it come up too in Twitter. I don't trust when someone is giving away OERs out of a moral obligation. It can mask something sinister. And I don't want to take this point and make too much of it, but I do believe that when it comes to an individual work like a book, there are many people who are happy to give it away. They've already done the work in writing it, and they're not writing it for profit. Many academic books only sell a couple $1,000s or a couple thousand copies anyway. We're not talking about huge royalties, and there's a genuine desire to share the work. Both Yochai Benkler and Hal Abelson used the exact same phrase when they were asked, why have you made your books available? It was the right thing to do. And I think that there are many people, and this is where some of my passion is, who just don't know that they can. They don't know that they could take their book and make it openly available. They're not concerned about the intellectual property rights, and they would be happy to share it with others. And so as we can make the effort to help them be aware of that, that would be good. And although many authors perhaps are excited to share, publishers may have a slightly different take on it, because oftentimes publishers are the ones who are putting up the financial capital to make the book succeed. So let's talk for just a moment about some empirical evidence. What happens to print sales of books when digital versions are made freely available? We've done 2 studies on this. You might have noticed a little over a year ago that The Future of Ideas, book by Lawrence Lessig, was made free. And what we were trying to figure out is, well, how can we determine whether this newly free book affects print sales or not? Like, what would your comparison group be if we were trying to do an experiment? So what we decided to do was compare sales of The Future of Ideas with sales of the book I mentioned earlier, Free Culture. Now, Free Culture was released free in digital format and print format at the same time, whereas The Future of Ideas was only in print for a while, and then the free digital version became available. So we would expect that Free Culture would have no openness effect, so to speak, because it had always been openly available. But that if there were some kind of effect of opening up the book, it would appear in The Future of Ideas. So what we did was we tracked the sales of both of these books for the full year before The Future of Ideas was made freely available, and then for the year after The Future of Ideas was made freely available. You can kind of see the graph here, and you notice that they follow a similar pattern. And what we thought was significant is, in general, book sales are obviously going to be declining as a book becomes older. Free Culture is a newer book by a few years than The Future of Ideas, so we would expect its sales to be higher. But notice that as a percentage, Free Culture sold 72.6% as many books in 2008 as in 2007. The Future of Ideas sold 71.9%. Now, if giving away The Future of Ideas for free was going to trigger a massive decline in people buying the book, we'd expect that there would be a much bigger disparity between those two. Now, this is obviously just an isolated case study, but that was enough to kind of spark our interest in learning more. So currently what we're working on, and with any luck will be published in a month or two, is a study where we took 41 books that were only in print, and then a free copy was available, and we tracked the sales for a 2-month period of time before and after the free version was available. And these books were put into 4 different categories based on how they were, the genre or how they were distributed. One category was nonfiction books, and of those, 6 of the 7 books had sale increases once the free version was available. There was a second group of 5 kind of random fiction titles, and 3 of those 5 saw sales increases. Then Random House did a promotion where they released 5 books all at once. We tracked those 5 books. 4 of those 5 saw sales increases. Tor Books also did a separate promotion, and that one was in direct contrast to all the others. Only 4 out of the 24 Tor titles saw sales increases. Overall, they were dramatically down. So it caused a little wrinkle into the research, and as we investigate a little more, can't say for sure why that was the case, but something interesting is that the Tor books were only available for 1 week, and you had to register to get them. So that may have prevented some people from accessing them, that may have prevented the word of mouth. But when those factors weren't in place, when the book was out there, it was freely accessible, sales increased the vast majority of the time. Now the Tor story tells us one other thing though, and this will bridge into our next topic, is that although they we don't know for sure, they may have lost sales because they're free promotion, they also gained a lot of valuable information from their customers. And so as we go to talk about a third example, flat world knowledge, we focus on the fact that sometimes you give away something for free because you're going to sell or utilize, make money in a different way. And I presume that a lot of you are familiar with the flat world story. If I can just give a quick commercial for this book, Free, by Chris Anderson. If you turn to page 160, there's a full page about flat world knowledge and answering the question, how can a textbook be made free? So just a little kind of background. The flat world knowledge model begins with authors with established reputations writing a textbook, and then the textbook is made openly available on the internet with a license that allows an individual professor to modify that in any way he or she wants. In addition to the free digital version of the textbook, students could buy a printed version, they could buy a PDF version that's ready to be printed. They could also buy supplementary materials such as online quizzes, flashcards, audio versions are made available. So the idea is that we're getting all sorts of versions of the book to the student and at a dramatically lower price. Instead of $180, a textbook might cost $30 instead. So the question is, what happens to Flat World as they give away this book? Well, we're going to talk about two series of tests that they did. First was what's called the alpha test, and very long story short, the professors loved it and the students loved it. And what they did was they surveyed several professors, over 100, and said, here's our approach, what do you think? And it was universally said, this is a great idea. They surveyed over 1,000 students, universally they said, this is a great idea. Who's not going to like the idea of a $30 textbook or a free textbook instead of a $200 textbook? But the question is, can Flat World Knowledge make money? If you're giving away your crown jewels, what happens to the bottom line? So in the beta test, and feel free to correct if I make any mistakes here, 6 Flat World Knowledge books were used as the primary textbook in 27 classes. This is this past winter semester. So in total, 750 students were enrolled in classes that used the Flat World Knowledge textbook. All of these students had access to the free digital online version. So to pass the course, nobody had to buy anything. Of the 750 students, 59% placed at least one order with Flat World Knowledge, with the average student spending $28.20. So this is very interesting, showing that even though what you would think is the meat and potatoes is free, people are still buying, a lot of people, and the average order is significant. In total, 294 printed textbooks were purchased by students. So 39% of students chose to buy a print copy of the textbook, even though the free version was made available. And in addition, they had opportunities where you could buy a certain version of the textbook and it would come bundled with flashcards or bundled with quizzes or bundled with other things. And so if you want to take a look at kind of the whole thing, Flat World is typically selling, although you can buy the whole book, you can also buy by the chapter. So if you only want to get the audio version of chapter 12, you can do that. So here you can see kind of a graph depicting how many items of each flashcards, audiobook, audio study guides, printable PDF, online quizzes were purchased. And I guess to me what's exciting is to see that here is a company that's giving away the book, but is still able to make money. earlier, in one of the earlier sessions, talked about myths of open textbooks, and one of those myths being that no one can make money on open textbooks. Well, here's a place where the author of the textbook gets a larger royalty than in a traditional publishing format, and the publisher is able to make money and sustain and grow. So to sum up, our original question, why are authors and publishers giving away their creative work? From an author's perspective, many have a strong desire to increase the exposure of the work. An author says, I just want people to access the work that I've done. Some feel a moral obligation to share what they've written with others. Empirical evidence suggests that currently, and obviously this is a rapidly changing world, and so what happens to digital book sales 6 months from now could be very different from what happened 6 months ago, but currently, free books tend to be correlated with increased print sales. And Flat World Knowledge gives us a case study to show that a free electronic book can be used to generate sales of other products. Thank you.
Excuse me? So you said free ebook. So how can they use that book within the, can they read it from the Sony ebook reader or something? Or
You're talking about specifically with Flat World?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's online, so if you have a computer, you can, just like you would read a regular web page.
Okay, so it's not available in ebook readers like Sony or Kindle.
The PDF version can be read on either of those devices now.
But they don't
will
pay
also
for it,
be,
though.
but you pay for that, right?
Okay.
And so, and we'll also be selling EPUB files directly, which are another format for the Sony reader this fall. So the idea is, yeah, if you want to get it off the web to an internet connection and onto a reader, there's a price associated with that.
That's the price.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, John. So while you're just getting set up, I'll introduce Dr. Joel Furstein. His presentation is Living the Dream, Best Practices in OER Publication. Joel is Associate Provost for Innovative Scholarly Communication at Rice University and Executive Director at Connections. Prior to that, Joel worked in a variety of institutions. There's a whole list here, believe it. Yeah. Anyways, Associate Professor and Director of New Media Communications at Oregon State University, Professor at Baylor, Southern Illinois University, and Communications Law at Syracuse University. Joel has extensive experience in working in radio, television, newspaper, and has been quoted extensively by the press as an expert in education and telecommunications. And he's also frequently invited as a panelist and guest speaker, so we're really happy to have him with us today.
Thanks, John. Thank you for setting this up, by the way. David just left. These grad students are wonderful. That's a good thing. I miss them. I'm going to block your microphone, whoever set this up here, so I better stand back here. I'm not just sure I like the title of this presentation, Living the Dream, because it sounds like this is the end. We're at the end of the road, all things have been achieved, and we're ready to go now. I have no answers for you. There is no end of the road that I have. Probably a better title would have been, The Future is Not What It Used to Be. Think about that for a minute. The jokes are slow. But the idea is, again, that this is, I have no answers. This is just more questions. I come at this from the connections perspective, and I thought I would put that up there because that gives you a sense of where I started. And so, again, I'm going to cover a lot of things. My biases, obviously, are those of Connections because I'm the Executive Director of Connections. Modularization. This is something that's been adopted by pretty much the entire education world, sort of. We have the content producers. Flat World Knowledge is here. I left Pearson yesterday. There's a variety of people. Everybody's looking at modularizing their content now for a variety of reasons. And we learned a lot of things about modularization. One is that it can be updated more rapidly and more cost effectively, because if you update an entire book, you have to update the entire book, even though only one or two things in the book have to be updated. If you modularize your content, you can update the modules. That's a lot more cost effective. It's a lot more efficient. And so modularization is a good thing generally for content producers. Content users, professors, teachers, what have you, is this a good thing? That is unclear and unknown yet, because as a professor, I'm not sure whether I like modularized content. because I have to string all these modules together every term. So I'm going to string it together once I've created my own book. That's great, and I can put things in and out. I think I like this. This sounds good, but we haven't yet been embraced by the professorial and the academics of the community. And so modularization, while it's a good thing, again, this is the connection system of operation. We're all modular. We see this as a step forward in the creation of content. And so it seems like in the open community, we've adopted this modularization as the strategy. Most of the open source and open access projects are modularized of some sort or other. Openness. That's a hard one. There's a whole variety of what this means open and what's not. And again, we're not sure, and I appreciate John's presentation because it starts to look at what's open and whether this is a good thing or not. How you can make money, is it sustainable, is this the right way to go? And the answer is yet unknown. We're starting to get data in. This is like some of the early data starting to come back. That's a good thing. We're starting to get feedback now, and we're starting to, again, determine that the future is not what it used to be. Maybe we'll have to change where we're going down the road. Again, capturing the power of Web 2.0. If you have an open system and an open platform where everybody can contribute, is that a good thing? You've got a whole lot of data now, and that's a problem. Because if you have everybody contributing, then it may not be good. We have the internet as the example of that. We have all kinds of people contributing to the internet. Most of it's crap, sadly, but maybe not. We don't know where that next good idea is coming from, and so we're not sure whether this is a good idea or not, because if you believe in the diversity of the marketplace of ideas, then it's a good thing to have all the ideas, even though most of it's crap. That one that may not get to the surface of the marketplace in a traditional kind of setting in a closed marketplace gets there in an open marketplace. So it depends on your personal philosophy. In the United States and lots of the Western Hemisphere, we've adopted this marketplace and free ideas and free flow of information as our basis of society, because we believe in the marketplace of ideas. Whether you actually have thought about that before, the United States Constitution is based on the marketplace of ideas. The Canadian government is loosely based on the marketplace of ideas. It's very close. I'm a Canadian also. And so we have this kind of open society where information kind of flows freely. And so some societies more than others have adopted this kind of marketplace. As Catherine talked about this morning, that's a difficult shift for some cultures who have not had that traditionally. The people say, well, I'm not sure why would I want to do that or not. That was very astute this morning. I appreciated your comments. And so we have to figure out whether this is a good idea. And how do we control for that? And again, there are things and connections. We use lenses to control for that, where you have endorsement systems that control the amount of information that you have access to if you want. You don't have to, but you can. But still, you have to then evaluate the person evaluating the information. And so that puts more onus on the information user. And again, for community and content creators, that's a good thing. We like this idea. This is okay. Morgan Powell's here from CK12. Similar kinds, they have community-controlled devices. Eric from Flat World Knowledge is here. Again, the community has vetted the information before it gets to you. That's a good thing, because now I don't have to decide, is this good or is this not good, because the community has decided this is good. Maybe we want the community to be a little bit broader than that. So again, we're starting to see this. We're not quite sure where the end is going to where we're going to end up in the end, but we're starting to see that to sort this out, and we're starting to get data back. So we're coming to an answer. One of the things that's important is permanent versioning. We can store everything forever. This is great. And there were always these things when I was a kid, someday you'll be able to store all the information in the history of the world on a single device this size. Well, we're past that now. Now we're storing it. We're creating more information and more information. And so, but we can still store it all. Well, sort of. We're not quite up to permanent storage and everything yet, but we're getting there. And again, because we keep creating new ways of acquiring data. I left the group at Oregon State University. I was in New Media Communications, as you read, and head of the New Media program. We did three-dimensional imaging. And three-dimensional imaging is taking geospatial data and making pictures out of it in 3 dimensions. It's really cool. It takes a lot of work to do that, and it stores tremendous amounts of information. We couldn't possibly store all that information. And so our mandate there was to get some of this information that we stored and created out to the public from some of the grants that the university had in the National Science Foundation. And that's complicated because a kindergarten isn't set up to have a three-dimensional geospatial data stored on their server. They don't have a server, first of all, and if they did, it wouldn't be that big. So we have to store it somewhere else, and we didn't have enough storage space to store all that information. So permanent versioning is, yes, we have permanent versioning for textual data. We're pretty good at audio and video. Certainly still images, we're getting better, but we're creating three-dimensional images faster than we can store them. We're creating video images faster than we can store them now, and so we have a little bit of an issue now in terms of permanent versioning. Once we get past the initial, well, we've got all the information together, we've stored all the information in the past, now we're up to the present and we can't keep up now. And so the future, again, is different than it used to be. Content portability. This is a big deal because all of the systems in theory in an open system can play with each other. That's the idea. But we don't have that yet. And we're working on that. There's groups, and Alan Bradford is here, does some consulting work in this area. This is a big deal, this content portability. How do we get this information around? How do we pass it around among ourselves? And so we have the issue of standards and interoperability. I'm on a standards committee for digital television in the Western Hemisphere, primarily Western Hemisphere. We reach out to Korea and some others, but this is an issue because if we pick this standard, we didn't pick that one, which means that we might have picked the wrong one. And so interoperability has its price because anytime you pick a standard, it limits what you can do. Even if you pick an open standard, it's hard. And this one, you know, in education, this is complicated because, you know, everything we're doing now is affected by the technology that's yet to be invented. The future is changing. The future is different than it used to be. And so we're trying to figure out how do we get this standard in a dynamic form, if we have a standard, that will allow us to integrate things that are yet to come. And I know a lot of the commercial enterprises that are in the room and a lot of the non-commercial enterprises that are in the room are trying to figure this out because they don't want to lose the data we have now. And so one of the things, you know, we've kind of looked at XML, we've looked at OAI, we've looked at a few things like this that are kind of settling in, kind of, sort of, maybe, but we're not done yet. We're still sorting all this out. And so we're starting to think about the standard balance because we're starting to think about we need these systems to talk to each other because we have a lot of content there, and there. And if I want to succeed as an individual in the peer-to-peer university group that was up here before, David Wiley's worked in this area already as well, is how do we piece all this information together? How do we pick that information and that information so that we can make our learners as smart as they can be? And this is the frustration of, again, the content consumers, is that I like that over there in Connections, I like that in CK12, I like that over there in Flat World. How do we get all this together? How do we merge all these things together? And that's complicated because the learner doesn't care. The instructor doesn't care what platform it's in. Yeah, maybe that one's a little bit better than this one, maybe that one can do stuff that this one can't. They don't care. They want to get this information and get it out to the students. They don't have time to mess with platforms. Even as a technologist in the education environment, I didn't have time to mess with platforms. I didn't care what the LMS the university was using today. I didn't need that. I had to figure out how to get my information to the students. And then when it changed every 5 minutes, that was worse. And so, again, settling on a standard is helpful, but it does, again, cut off everything else that goes on around it. So hopefully we do that wisely. Legal stuff. I don't think you mentioned my law background. Anyway, I'm also a lawyer. Sorry, it's too long.
Can't you hold the job, Joel?
Yeah, I know. It's terrible. Keep getting run on. The legal barriers to passing around information are complicated as well. The subtleties of law, and some of you have heard this before, and if I drift off and start heading towards the door before the questions start, it's because I had lunch with the Creative Commons director, Aresh Bissell, and I stuck him with a check. So anyway, and I'm on the run now, that's why he's sitting here looking at me. But the idea here is that, again, some of you aren't familiar with the subtleties of intellectual property law. You would think like, okay, public domain is the way to go. That's the most open we got. Put it in the public domain. It's available to everybody. No strings, no hang-ups, nothing. Everybody gives their stuff away. The problem is, not every country in the world recognizes public domain. And those countries that don't recognize public domain can take the content, somebody can copyright it within that country, and you're cut off. You can't have access to that content anymore in that country. That's a problem. So in order to avoid that problem, we've gone to the licensing structure, where the copyright holder maintains the ownership of the copyright. And so that's, again, where Creative Commons comes in, because they've created this wonderful licensing structure that allows for the copyright owner to maintain control of the material and yet make it publicly available in every country, even those that don't recognize public domain, because they're not giving away their copyright, they're just giving a license to you to use the information however you want. With the exception of, in the Creative Commons attribution system, you have to attribute the original author of the content. So there's other subtleties there in the Creative Commons system. The Creative Commons attribution to share alike licensing, then it provides the copyright holder with a little bit more power, because the copyright holder releases the information into the world, and the information then is available to the public, provided that they share their information back. That if they use the information and combine it with other information, that other information is then shared back into the commons, which is great in theory, except that the person that created the work doesn't have to do that. The copyright owner can go off and do whatever they want, because they still own the copyright. They can then sell their work to somebody else. So it's a little bit less open, and the commercial industry is not necessarily thrilled by that, because then they can't play with that information, because they contribute their work in because it's share alike, but they can't take that original work and sell it because somebody else can do that. So we have little subtle issues there with the intellectual property licensing that are complicated. And so how do we make this as open and sharing as possible? And again, we're sifting through all that. And again, I appreciate the work of Creative Commons, despite sticking them a check for lunch. They are doing good work. Distribution. We have a variety of distribution formats in our system. I think you guys have the same thing in CK12. You can distribute the information in a variety of different ways. And I know Flatworld does the same thing. And the reason is because we have partners who are working in areas that don't have connectivity. Some don't have electricity, as Catherine mentioned this morning. That's hard. If you don't have electricity, you're in trouble. It's very hard to read that computer without electricity. Eventually your battery will die. So you need one of these. A book. Remember this? Old technology. Gutenberg. Those are still in use around the world and very useful. We spent a lot of time perfecting this technology. Sorry. Well, I had to give Barbara a plug. But this is
get the lunch from you.
that's right. So again, we have to figure out how to deal with these issues in not only the third world, but in our world here in the United States and in Canada. We have lots of pieces of our world that don't have connectivity either. We would do projects with the schools in Texas. They don't have connectivity. They don't have access to computers. The students in these schools don't have access to computers at home. They have electricity. Most of them have electricity in the United States. Very few don't, but a few don't. But they don't have connectivity. And so, because we don't have ubiquitous connectivity in the US and Canada. And so they need this to go home with them every night. Despite the fact that it weighs 200 pounds. Sorry, Barbara. And you have to carry home 10 of them because you have 10 different subjects in high school. It's part of our health and fitness program. And so we've got to have that as an option. We also have to have, if you don't have connectivity but you do have electricity, you have to be able to download the information. And so, again, having a PDF version of this, and I know Flatworld provides this, CK12, Connections, we all provide PDF versions of what we do in order to give people an opportunity who have this but no connectivity. And then, of course, the easy solution is we've got it all in here, everybody's connected, and the world's a happy place. So again, distribution is eventually going to get there. And the initiative that Catherine mentioned about Rwanda are wonderful. It's wonderful to see that. Customization. Everybody wants to do it my way. part of life. It's part of the world. I have to do it my way. I don't like the way they're doing it. I have to do it my way. So we have to offer customization options. Even in the open world, we have to make it a little bit different than they're doing it. And I know Eric's faced this with his authors and trying to figure out how to make sure everybody's happy and they've all got their way of doing it. And so customization is a big part of this issue as well. We don't want some people to see certain materials. I presented before the European Commission about 6 months ago, and they laughed because I said that our schools in America don't allow the kids to have free internet access. They can't roam the internet for free. I said, aren't you the free society people? And we are, but we don't let our kids look at the internet. If you're under 18, you have no rights in the United States. So it's very disappointing for my daughter who's 10. But so the schools have to zone things off. And again, that's part of the way that we do things in the world, even in an open world. We have to protect children from certain things. Business models are many and varied. And I appreciated John's comments about the business model, Eric's efforts, and CK12's efforts on the business model. There's a lot of things going on in the business model world. Our model is a consortium model where we are looking for consortium partners to help us develop the enterprise in a larger way. And so, but there's a whole variety of these that are out there. Many of them are succeeding, some are not. And so we look to see how this is going to go over the course of the next few years, because I think the next few years will help us sort a lot of this stuff out. I do want to give some time for questions and answers, and so I'll turn it over to our moderator.
So I don't know, did we get a microphone?
No.
So any questions, and please indicate who you're directing the question at, but also repeat the question for the benefit of the camera.
I didn't have that many answers.
Question for John. Did any of the 10 authors have other intellectual property in their book, like photographs, that they had to get the permission of the photographer to make it open?
That's a great question. Sometimes the cover was not made open, and so the cover would maintain a copyright of maybe who the person took the photograph, but within the book, that was not an issue, so they never had to take it.
Jackie, it's an interesting. Can the camera hear me if I answer it? We try wherever possible to look to openly licensed images and things so that everything in the book is consistently licensed and can therefore be modified in the same way. But there are certainly times when we're developing a textbook where there's a piece of it that's proprietary and we're just permissioning it. And what we're trying to do now is handle those things as images wherever we can, so that there's we caption it as such, saying this is permissioned and somebody else owns it, therefore it's not open to be modified. But we also try to integrate that as an image, so that there's also a control on it, so that someone can't inadvertently modify something that they don't really have permission to modify. So it is a complex world when the big carrier of something is openly licensed and yet pieces of it are not. And we try to control for that through clarity of words around it and through the way we present it itself. But it's a tough issue, no question.
Yeah, just a comment. There's a couple of really good American literature books. Apologies, because it's neither Canadian nor South American nor Mexican, but put out by the U.S. government, and they look, we put them on our open list, and they're theoretically open, but when you go read the permissions page, you find out that all these photographs were by permission, and so we can't then take them and use them.
That's a good, I have several books that I wrote before I moved into Connections, and I can't put any of them in Connections because of that issue, because the images are not, in fact, the cover on one of my books is not licensed. So.
You got a question?
Hi, Joel. I'm Carol Hayes from Florida, from the Board of Governors.
Yes, how are you?
That was a really interesting thing to bring up, because I'm working with Orange Grove Digital Repository, which now has about 95 open access textbooks. who's collaborating with our University Press of Florida and a printer to be able to do print-on-demand textbooks. And one of the open access textbooks, the publisher, the University Press of Florida, went through every square, pixel of it to make sure everything was copyright cleared. There's one image in one of the books, can be printed at any time, but the digital, you have the online access, or you can print the digital one. They have to exclude the image. I thought that was fascinating.
Somebody take charge.
I guess first a comment, which is that this is immediately being followed in the room next door by a panel, which will also consist of some of these same people about open textbooks, so people can also migrate some of the questions there. And then I guess kind of a question or statement. I'd love to see more research along the lines of what you were doing, John, except focused on tangible outcomes other than financial outcomes, right? Because frankly, the vast, vast majority of what people publish, especially in this space, never makes any money, has no hope of ever doing so. And to sort of layer in that as like, I mean, obviously that's the hang up still, is this sense that it might, but that, I would hope we don't get to the space where everybody is thinking, this is the route, right? This is how I'm gonna finally make that lesson plan become that, next big thing.
I think that's a good point. You want to see how far these contents reach
Right.
the developing economies, and how successfully even the United States students, by using these free books or the free content, open content, and how successful they are. Because the financial piece is for business world, it's very important. But for educational world, it may not be, right? So it's a great point.
John, you should say something about your derivatives research.
I did talk a little bit about, that's kind of with the Lessig book, how several 100,000 copies have been downloaded. So financially, he may or may not have made more money, but from an author's perspective, his reach was greatly expanded.
Yeah, but he's a full-time tenured faculty member at Stanford, now at Harvard. And with the greatest of respect, you've selected 9 of the 10 authors are writing in academic context with secure employment, and as both Cory Doctorow and Jonathan Levin have said, I'm doing this because I can afford to do this. And for emerging writers and artists and authors, it's not as easy a question. And I think the research is necessary on emerging folk, both young, middle-aged, and not so middle-aged, in the sense that we have different expectations, both in terms of how we're going to make money, what value might be, at the same time as appreciating and desiring to give it away. Every artist I know wants a bigger audience and wants to give it away. At the same time, it'd be interesting to know how 10 romance writers would fare, as opposed to, say, 10 writers of 10 poets, and whether or not they'd be as comfortable with that if the only print run is that 1,000 beautifully produced books that puts them in a...
So, as you've